like to have a better bowel movement? For most people with IBS, that is the dream. Well, it's what you're striving for, and maybe it's why you're listening to this episode. Well, today I want to tell you how eating more fibre can make that dream come true. Maybe you've tried to introduce higher fibre foods before, and it resulted in such bad bloating, you felt like you needed to stay low FODMAP and low fibre forever. Maybe you're just too scared to try eating more fruit and veg after a salad that ruined the last barbecue you went to. In this episode of the Inside Knowledge for people with IBS, you'll discover different types of fibre and how to eat them, even if you don't think you can. Welcome to episode 95 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. I've wanted to cover the topic of fibre for absolutely ages, and so finally we're getting round to it. Episode 95, I can't believe I'm nearly at 100 episodes of this podcast. I just wanted to remind you, if you haven't listened to some of the earlier episodes, there's a whole backlog of really interesting topics and lots of things to do with constipation, specific diets for IBS, whether you should cut certain nutrients out of your food, and SIBO. And these are all available on all the normal podcast players that you listen to. And also, before we jump into today's content, I wanted to ask for a small favour for you to please give me a rating on the app that whatever you're listening on. It really does help me out. The more ratings a podcast has, the more people it will be shown to. It's as simple as that. And so if you could just give it a review or a like or whatever, that would really be appreciated. Thank you. All right then, so let's talk about fibre. Today, I really want to focus in on fibre, the different sorts of fibre, and the full range of benefits that you can get from eating a higher fibre diet. You've probably been told many times that fibre is good for you, but of course people who have IBS may have a big reaction to eating a higher fibre diet, which is possibly where you've got to. Most people that I work with in my 3-month gut reset, they are on a low fibre diet, and that is because high fibre foods have led to severe problems, so they've cut more and more foods out. So I'm going to talk to you about how you can increase your fibre without increasing your symptoms. Fibre itself is actually a complex carbohydrate, and it's got lots of benefits outside of the gut. It's really important at helping us to feel full from our meals. Generally, eating a high fibre diet is quite low calorie, but quite bulky. So you could eat a kilo of broccoli. This is an extreme example. Nobody eats that, but a kilo of broccoli, and there's very low amount of energy intake in that. For example, there's no protein, there's low fat, but you're getting a lot of volume. So the good thing about a high fibre diet is it will fill you up. Now, this has got a double-edged sword for some people that I work with, because if you are under eating, then eating a high fibre diet may not be giving you enough calories. But we'll come back onto that a little bit later. But in terms of your digestion, what fibre does is it helps to increase bulk in your stool. And that bulk actually pushes or creates momentum. So it actually stimulates your smooth muscles in your digestive system to push the food waste along the gut. Fibre has also got some really important roles in keeping water in the bowel, so it doesn't dry out, doesn't get too hard and constipated, but also by retaining the water in a kind of gel forming, it means it doesn't go through you too quickly either. If you're someone who's got diarrhea, then a higher fibre diet could actually be beneficial. There's some really amazing stats about why fibre is so helpful for us, and in studies they've shown that every 10 grams of fibre that you can raise your diet by, there's a relative 10% risk reduction of getting colorectal cancer. And interestingly, this was particularly seen for people who increase their fibre from whole grains. The whole grains are things like brown bread, brown rice, oats. I'll come on to why those are so important, but those are some of the first foods that people will start cutting out. You go gluten-free and get rid of all the wheat in your diet. that's going to reduce your fibre intake by a lot. There's also some research, I think, that shows a lot of the fibre in our diet does come from grains, but unfortunately it's white flour. So if you have like pizza, maybe you have white bread, white rice, and a lot of it, these products are often linked up with higher fat foods, high sugar and salt content. So whilst we're having a low fibre product, we're having a lot of them. And so that grains does make up a large proportion of our fibre intake in the UK, but we are all under eating in whole grains. So like brown bread, brown rice and other grains. Sometimes we need to pick into the data a little bit more, but I thought that was really interesting. So 10 grams of fibre can reduce your risk of getting colon cancer. Now, for some people, you will have to stay on a lower fibre diet for whatever reason. And there are ways that we can get around that. Not everybody can eat gluten-containing foods, for example. Like if you've got celiac disease, it doesn't mean that you should have to eat a low fibre diet. And there are some other ways we can tackle that. But it's not just about the gut either. So for every 7 grams of fibre that you eat, there's another relative risk reduction for cardiovascular disease of 9%, and you've got 7% less chance of having a stroke and 6% less chance of getting diabetes. So these are really good odds. Like if this was a medication, it would be rolled out to everyone. And we know all of this information, and yet often it is hard to increase our fibre. Even if you don't have IBS, generally, the population in the UK is not eating enough fibre. The targets for us to aim for are 30 grams per day, and that's if you're 16 and over. If you're a teenager between 11 and age 16, then the target is around 25 grams, and it's 20 grams per day for children. Adults are eating around 19.5 grams per day, so we're kind of 10 grams short, and actually that 10 grams, as I just mentioned, can see a massive difference in your risk reduction for metabolic conditions and also for gut health conditions. So maybe the gap between us achieving those targets and not achieving them is part of the contributing factor to some of the ongoing diseases that we see so commonly. The way we break fibre down to better understand its actions in the gut, there are 3 kind of sliding scales that you might imagine, and all foods will sit somewhere on this sliding scale, from soluble to non-soluble, and that is how much the fibre dissolves in your gut or dissolves in a glass of water, from low viscosity to high viscosity, so how gel forming is it? So does it, when it gets into the water, create a gel-like substance? And then how fermentable is it? Is it highly fermentable or not fermentable? And that means how much the fibre is metabolized by your gut bacteria. So how much do your gut bacteria enjoy eating it? Now, all of these 3 actions are important, and that is why eating the broadest range of foods is really helpful. Highly soluble fibre will dissolve in the gut and create a kind of gel-like substance, but then fibre that's insoluble will create a lot of bulk. So that's one way that we kind of classify the fibre. Then the viscosity, like I said, is how much gel it creates. When things are highly viscous, so they can slow down the rate of you absorbing carbohydrates, for example, they may also help to soak up cholesterol from your poo and excrete it. And then also the fermentability is how much the gut bacteria enjoy eating it, and also what the gut bacteria are producing as a result of contact with this fermentable fibre. All foods that have got fibre in them will fall somewhere into these sliding scales, so whether they are high viscosity, low soluble, etc. I thought I'd give you a few examples of what that might look like. So, for example, soluble fermentable fibre includes things like pectin, inulin. Pectin's high in apples, like inulin you'll find in prebiotic foods like chickpeas, for example. You get fructooligosaccharides and galactooligosaccharides, and again, those are high FODMAP foods. Then you've got things like partially soluble and a bit fermentable, which includes psyllium husk and oats, and these are really good at holding the water in the gut and may be a bit fermentable for some people. And then you get things that are insoluble and a bit fermentable. So wheat bran, and wheat bran is not necessarily one of the best fibres for people with IBS, but also very common in fruits and vegetables. Insoluble fibre is often in the peel of fruits and veg. And then you get insoluble non-fermentable fibres, which are like cellulose, methyl cellulose, and sometimes these are actually used in products, but also are found naturally in plants. All of the foods we eat that have got fibre in them will be somewhere on the range of high to low in terms of soluble and fermentable. You can't measure it exactly, but this is why eating a broad range is so important. Some of these foods that are typically normally classed as high FODMAP, such as beans, onions, apples, these are prebiotics which help to feed the good bacteria. Now, when these bacteria come into contact with fibre that they love to eat, they produce something called short-chain fatty acids. And if you haven't heard about these, you might be surprised to hear that they're not just important for your gut, but our whole body. They influence our immune system, our nervous system, and they can even cross the blood-brain barrier and get into our brain. The blood-brain barrier is something that keeps toxins out of our brain because, of course, if anything gets into the brain, it's really not a good idea. But certain key nutrients need to get into the brain. Not many things can cross the blood-brain barrier, but short-chain fatty acids can. There are some experiments on animals as well showing that changing the levels of short-chain fatty acids, either by adding them to an animal's food, might affect mood disorders like depression and dementia. It's a big area of research. I'm not as familiar, I've got to be honest, with the research into the short-chain fatty acid implications for the nervous system, but I do know that they are anti-inflammatory, so they help the immune system to differentiate between things it needs to react to and it doesn't. So T regulatory cells, it can activate those and support them, and also helps just to reduce general inflammation. So the short chain fatty acids have a role in the liver as well. But in the gut, they are also massively important. They help to create a fuel source for the colon cells, helping them stay really healthy. And they help to create a nice mucus lining, support the tight junctions between the different cells. So, you know, in our gut, we have just one thin layer between the inside and the outside. So the outside of the body, even though it's within the torso of your body, we still class it in a way to be outside until nutrients have been absorbed through the cell into your tissues. Then this food is just passing through us. There's just one cell between the inside and the outside. What we also have is tight junctions between the cells, so they create like a little layer of bricks. Now, if those junctions come apart and food starts to get in between the cells, sometimes this is called leaky gut, but those tight junctions are really important at helping to maintain the integrity of our gut walls. 3 types of short-chain fatty acids that the bacteria make, and all these different types of gut bacteria are known to produce different sorts of these short-chain fatty acids. Now, some of them, the actual short-chain fatty acid itself becomes a substrate for the bacteria. So one bacteria might like to eat something that another bacteria has made. So the different names that you might hear for these types of fatty acids that they produce is propionate, butyrate and acetate. Now, sometimes you can even get a supplement, butyrate, that people can take. So it's the end form, and sometimes it's called a postbiotic that you can take in supplement form. Now, this is a new-ish area of research, and we don't really have that much evidence about taking it in supplement form. But what we do know is that you can increase the levels of this output of your bacteria by changing the amount of fibre in your diet. That's the introduction to fibre and what it can do for you and why it is so important. But now if you're listening to this thinking, yeah, okay, but I've got IBS and I can't increase my fibre because every time I do, I get bloated, I get stomach pains, and I just feel awful. Now, that is definitely the case for nearly everyone I work with. And so we need to find ways of increasing your fibre without triggering your symptoms. And a good way to do this, I like to start with my clients, is focusing on low FODMAP fibres first. Within your diet, whatever you've ended up with that keeps your IBS symptom free or flare up free, you've probably got foods available to you that you're not using. What I mean by that is there could be foods that are more unusual that can give you some extra nutrition, increase your fibre levels and change your taste and enjoyment of food that you're not actually accessing at the moment. For example, when's the last time you ate a cup of rhubarb? That could give you 3 grams of fibre. It's low FODMAP. When's the last time you ate some aubergine or eggplant if you're in the USA? You can have 175 grams of aubergine, and that again gives you 3 grams of fibre. Adding those two things up would be pretty much at your suggested level of adding 7 grams of fibre to your diet, which is going to reduce your cardiovascular disease risk. What about adding a cup of quinoa? That could actually give you around 5 grams of fibre per day, and it's low FODMAP. So I'm just, by giving you those examples, wanted to show you that there could be some low FODMAP, higher fibre foods that you're not eating right now, and there's opportunity for you to trial these and test them in a relatively safe way. The reason that they're low FODMAP is that they're less fermentable. So of course we're still keeping the levels of fermentation quite low, but if you would like a handout that I have designed that gives you all this information, then go to the show notes. You can download this free guide, which is low FODMAP fibre, and there's a little table in there which will explain to you exactly how to increase your fibre without getting too many symptoms. Of course, you may still react to these, and I can't guarantee that you won't, but these are all low FODMAP amounts, and I know that it works to increase your diet in such a way. If you're going to now think about how to implement some of this increase in fibre, I would say, similar to starting with the supplements of any kind, start low and slow. So pick one of these foods, maybe one of the ones that's going to give you 1 extra gram of fibre per day. Just add that for a few days. So you might take a small handful of Brazil nuts, or you might take a couple of nibbles of extra bits of broccoli. Just a small amount to begin with, and then increase it over time. So you do not want to go from 0 to 100 and leap from barely any fibre to suddenly having loads, even if it is all low FODMAP fibre, because it could impact your gut in a way that just doesn't make you feel comfortable. A few people I work with will struggle to put on weight or have lost too much weight because of restrictive diets. And listen to episode 50 about how to gain weight when you have IBS, and also episode 51 about how to increase your appetite. In those episodes, though, I do talk about how very high fibre, low calorie diets are not really going to help you put on weight. So what we want to think about is, if that affects you, is this is additional food on top of the food that's going to help you gain weight, which is going to be higher calorie density foods, like if you can tolerate small amounts of cheese, small amounts of fat and oils. But you also want to put in as much protein as you can. So this extra fibre that you're adding in is additional to what you are already able to consume, especially starting with the lower FODMAP fibres that are less likely to leave you bloated. Simple ways to add a little bit more fibre to your diet include things like just adding a small piece of fruit after your lunch, perhaps, or adding a tablespoon of seeds or ground up nuts onto your porridge, into your oats in the morning. So maybe you're adding in a little bit of pumpkin seeds, perhaps a sprinkling of chia seeds. Just starting with really small amounts and building up from there. Flax seeds are a really good way to support good gut health as well, because they're quite easy to digest in small amounts, at least anyway, of a tablespoon, but they also retain a little bit of water, so they're one of those fibres that helps to form a bit of gel and can improve the consistency of your poo. Some of you might be wondering whether you can have too much fibre. Is that a problem? And yes, you can. So you can eat too much fibre to the extent that it can cause IBS type symptoms. Listen to episode 49, which was a case study episode about Fran, who had a very noisy, gurgly digestion, and she was desperate to be really healthy. So she was probably eating about 9 or 10 portions of fruit and veg a day. because she really wanted to be super healthy, and she'd read a lot about, the different 30 base plant foods a week for good gut health. Listen to episode 57 for more about that and whether it is a good valid target we should all be aspiring to or not. But she was eating probably a bit too much fibre, and when we focused on increasing her protein to balance out the macronutrients, so we've got fats, protein and carbs, when she had more protein and slightly less fibre, her digestion actually worked a lot better and her energy levels were good too. I have also worked with people who just do get on better on a low fibre diet. So if you've listened to all of this and think, actually, I still can't manage a high fibre diet, then don't panic. I know it can feel very worrying when you hear those stats that I shared at the beginning, saying you're going to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer, you're going to reduce your risk of a stroke, and yet, I can't manage that. How do I cope? Well, if you're keeping your fibre levels very low, for example, you have IBD as well as IBS or something like that, then there's a very good reason for that, because it's managing your symptoms. So there may well be times when a low fibre diet is what's needed, and it's not for everybody to have a high fibre diet, but the majority of people do well when they increase their fibre. And that even goes for people who have diarrhea type IBS. Obviously, we know that increasing your fibre levels are good for constipation and slow transit time, but it also helps with diarrhea and loose stools. It firms them up and it helps to produce a soft but easy to pass stool. The other thing that's really important to do when you're adding in lots of fibre to your diet is to increase your water intake, because that helps you keep the bowels moving and avoid you getting too constipated. If you're really stressing about how you're going to get that much fruit, vegetables, whole grains and pulses into your diet, then maybe you're wondering about a fibre supplement and whether that would be helpful for you. I have mentioned psyllium husk before. That is generally well tolerated for most people who have IBS, but again, go slowly, start small. It can really help. Another type of fibre that is generally well tolerated for a lot of people with IBS is partially hydrolyzed guar gum, or PHGG. This is really helpful in lots of cases to feed the good bacteria because it is a prebiotic, or it has prebiotic properties, but it's not massively fermentable in the same way. It doesn't add to your gas and bloating as some other prebiotic fibres maybe. HGG is classed as low FODMAP, and that might be helpful for you in order to add a little bit of fibre to your diet. One fibre that is generally not as well tolerated is things like wheat bran. So this might be high in bran that you can put on top of cereal, bran flakes, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily very well tolerated. In fact, in many studies, it has been shown to worsen symptoms, including bloating, pain, cramping, that kind of thing. So generally, that would be one fibre to probably stay away from. But other than that, in terms of like fibre that you can add, apart from all the other things I've mentioned, like linseeds or flax seeds, oats, those kind of foods, which are very good, I would not normally recommend any other fibre that you can top onto your food in terms of supplements. There was a lot of content in this episode. I hope some of it has been useful in explaining the role of fibre to you and also how you can increase your fibre. Remember to get that download if you want my list of low FODMAP foods that are higher in fibre and the exact portions that you need to be including to slowly increase your fibre intake. As I close out the episode, I'd also ask again, I would love it if you will give me a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge for People with IBS. Better digestion for everyone.